局。各位观众朋友您好，我们今天很开心可以邀请到2011年的诺贝尔奖得主沙金特博士来接受我们的专访。沙金特博士过去在美国经济学会 AEA 的主席，而现在同时也是美国国家科学院的院士。我们欢迎博士。Hello, Dr. Shajin. The first question we want to ask is that, as everybody knows that you have great contribution in the macroeconomy, so we want to ask is that as the global economy slows down, the U.S. Federal Reserve have already launched QE3. So how it means for the market and the U.S. economy?
Many people don't know what's going to happen. So its departure is based not so much on accumulated wisdom from the past, because we're doing things we haven't done before. The best case is that QE3 really doesn't mean much. What's happened is, and there's a very famous theory about this that goes back to Adam Smith and a very great economist named Neil Wallis in the United States. And he showed particular conditions under which, if the government does something, if the Fed does something like QE3, under the conditions that Neil Wallis had, I'll tell you what the conditions were in a minute, QE3 won't do any good and it won't do any harm. Essentially, it's an operation that the Fed does, and as long as the government does not change fiscal policy, meaning taxes and government expenditures, as long as it doesn't threaten the existing plans for government expenditures and taxes, it won't do anything. The worst case is this. The condition that in Neil Wallis's work, that QE3 won't make any difference so long as government taxes and expenditures remain unchanged, that will be violated. That QE3 will make it easier for the government to run deficits, to have government expenditures that are big relative to taxes, and the consequences of that will be putting more and more money in the future, and it will cause more and more inflation. And the ultimate route through that is that the government, QE3 is going to make it easier for the government to raise revenues through an inflation tax. Because government has to, if the government's going to spend, if the U.S. government's going to spend, it somehow is going to have to tax. And one tax that's a secret tax, people call it a thief in the night, is the inflation tax. And government can raise a lot of revenues from that. And so the reason people move into gold and other assets that protect them from inflation is fear of that.
So you think that if this QE3 doesn't work or doesn't mean a lot, that will be the best solution?
It's the best case for the fall. It's a strange statement, right?
But if that means that the Federal Reserve has no reason to launch the QE3.
That's a great question. If you listen closely to what Chairman Bernanke says, he very carefully says, he says two things simultaneously. And when you listen to these two things, there's a tension between them. He says monetary policy is not a cure-all or panacea. He said that repeatedly. And he's saying that there are severe limits to what monetary policy can accomplish. Now, when he's saying that, he's referring to really to Neil Wallis's work and to Milton Friedman's famous paper where he says monetary policy has very limited ability to affect the real economy. And Bernanke, he has a complicated job because he's communicating both to very sophisticated people who have a great deal of knowledge and wisdom about markets because they participate in it. He's communicating to the best economists. He's communicating to central bankers. So he has to choose words. It's a very difficult job, maybe an impossible job. And then he'll also say in the same speech, but monetary policy still has tools. He says we still have the adequate tools to make sure that the economy is running okay.
But it still sounds like the QE3 is really a risk. So if we don't look at the dark side of it, like inflation, do you think the bright side of it that achieve the goal to stimulate the market will work?
And other central bankers can't say the following kind of thing in public, but it's a consideration. What inflation does is, in addition to being a tax, one way monetary policy can conceivably work is by generating inflation. If you have a one-time inflation of 10 or 20 or 30%, and all prices, inflation, pure inflation is all prices go up proportionally. But what a pure inflation does is it, sudden pure inflation that's unexpected. It's a theoretical construct. It transfers real resources from creditors, from lenders, to borrowers. Because the IOUs, the borrowers they owe the same in dollars, but they owe a reduced amount in real terms. And if you do a little exercise, you can, in inflation growth, take financial institutions and borrowers who are underwater, who are insolvent, and make them solvent. And there's an old saying within the halls of central banks, you don't say it outside, is the job of monetary policy is to convert bad loans into good loans. And inflation does this. And Hong Kong did this in 1983. There was a financial crisis in Hong Kong, and the way that was solved, there's an interesting story. They had a sudden depreciation of the Hong Kong dollar. The dark side is one way Qe3 will work. It's a way, a little bit more inflation is a way of transferring resources to banks whose balance sheets are in bad shape. That's a consideration.
Except America, we want to talk about Europe. The Europe has struggled in the debt crisis, and the European Central Bank is trying hard to get out of the trouble. They put the outright monetary transaction. How do you see this? Can you tell us the situation now in Europe?
Governments in various countries have issued large amounts of debt, and now the question is who's going to pay for it? And now there's pressure for other countries to pay it. There's pressure for the ECB now to start buying some of the debt. And so what you've seen in the last week is the ECB has promised to buy amounts of, it's changed what it was supposed to do. And if it actually does that, it's going to be a big change. And it's not even, there continues to be people that don't want it to do that. It's significant that the German central bank voted against that. So I don't think it's at all clear what's going to happen.
According to your prediction, what time will the global economy start recovering? Do you think it will be better in the first half of the year in 2013?
There's lots of political risk. So there's lots of risks that economists isn't a particularly good person to ask. There's huge political risk in the United States. We have this fiscal cliff. Depending on what, I can tell you various scenarios. There's lots of worst cases there. In Europe, there's lots of worst cases, and those are going to have big effects on the economy. Because what happens in Europe has big effects on what happens in Asia and in the United States. So I'll tell you, I don't know.
So in this tough situation when Europe and America is weak, how should we do? As for Taiwan government, what's your suggestion?
I think macroeconomics has some broad advice about having government budgets that are balanced in the present value sense, not relying on printing money to raise an inflation tax, having entitlement programs that make sense and are not that have honest accounting. There's lots of examples across countries where entitlement programs are not pay-as-you-go as in the United States, but they have some funding where there's really a fund. So all of those are things for governments, not just in Asia but in the United States. And I think in many cases the United States has things to learn from other countries like in Asia and Latin America, who put together entitlement programs that fit together better.
Thank you for today's coming. 经济不景气，欧洲和美国的政府都做了非常多的政策来提振自己的经济，但是 Qe3 透过印钞票的方式来刺激经济，可不可以达到目的？而且它的反效果，通货膨胀会不会甚 胜过了当初的目标，都是未来将观察的焦点。我们把镜头交还给棚内主播。